If I hit here, you'll get all three cameras. We ready? We are in an undisclosed location, interrogating Jim Osterberg about the Stooges, the greatest rock and roll band ever.
Welcome to Rock Docs, a podcast about music documentaries brought to you by Treble Media. We're at Rock Docs Pod on Twitter and Instagram. I'm your host, David Lizabram, here with my other host,
Andrew Keats.
Bringing the excitement as always. Today we're going to talk about a film called Gimme Danger, about the band The Stooges, also known as Iggy and the Stooges from time to time. It's directed by the filmmaker Jim Jarmusch from 2016. But before we get into that, we are joined by a very special guest, Dan Koch, who I know from the music podcast Pretty Good Vibrations, which I was turned on to by my friend Brandon. Shout out, Brandon, if you're listening. It's sort of imagine a podcast like ours, but he puts a lot of work into it and does a good job. Where they go through.
Wait, it's not about movies though, right? Like we still have that territory.
We've got that nailed down.
Yeah,
we don't have to work hard.
Not competing there. No,
great.
I mean, I do have a couple ideas for like. I have an Almost Famous episode idea and a High Fidelity top 5 list idea. There might be a couple films here and there, but no, we're not directly competing. I would say our shows are actually a fine complement to each
Perfect
other.
compliment. All right,
right. Yeah. So like what I like about what you do is on your show is like you'll pick kind of a genre or an era of music, and it could be pretty varied. And go through it usually with a guest like for over hours, and you've got tons of clips of different music, and a lot of things. It might be stuff that I may not be that familiar with. Sometimes it's stuff that I know real well. Other times it might be things related to emo or other things that you were more involved with, like in as a musician. And I don't know a ton about, but it's interesting to learn. You did a series recently on like kind of Christian music from like the 70s, I would say.
Jesus movement era. Yeah, 67 to 79. Yeah.
Nothing about being a like Jew, but not my thing.
Well, the same people still voted Trump into office, whether you're a Jew or not.
Fair enough.
I had a partly sociological interest in that group because that is white evangelical Protestants basically, and both my parents were sort of in that movement, and so it was just a really cool kind of like I got connections back to it, and it's just white evangelicals are interesting to me. So that was fun.
Yeah, I would not have known that I would like be interested for 2 hours to hear about the music of the
evangelical. It held
Christian
your
movement.
Attention?
Yeah,
That's
I was
good.
like, wow, this is really interesting. I mean, some of the music was kind of killer. Like the lyrics sometimes were
fucking
off,
great.
But,
yeah. Lyrics are rough on those tracks. Yeah,
but there are some real funky like 70s, soul.
Yes.
Like, I mean, even the white people sometimes came up with some good stuff.
I know. I think there's a sweet spot there for pop music because it's like it's right as the recordings are getting good enough in the late 70s, but like contemporary Christian music as a monstrosity does not yet exist. The infrastructure's not there yet. And so for a few years, you've got these like guys that are playing on Toto records, like real LA session players making these just blatantly evangelical records. And then after that it just goes its own way, and now you can tell a Christian song by how it sounds. You don't even need to hear the lyrics because it's its own thing in a lot of cases. Anyway, I'll stop talking about it.
Let me ask you.
No, it's super interesting.
Are you into Larry Norman?
Well, we covered Larry Norman. We covered 2 of his albums in the walkthrough, and I know a bit about him. I think that the good songs on those first 3 or 4 records or whatever are
great,
fucking good.
Great,
it is cool 70s rock and roll, man.
That is
it's
exactly
not that
right.
many clicks off of listening to Elton John or the Stones. Like it's in the ballpark.
It's none clicks.
He could
it's
go
none clicks off of Elton John or the Stones.
0 clicks. Yeah. He's a better singer than like Keith Green and some of the other guys. Yeah, Larry Norman's pretty fucking great. Mm-hmm. Except that my thing with Larry Norman is the problem is the single great, and I say this as someone who has healed from this trauma, so don't feel bad. The single greatest source of trauma in my life is like end times Jesus is coming back rapture teachings given to me at a young age when I already had anxiety growing up evangelical. And Larry Norman wrote the fucking the most triggering song of or anything. Like ask any evangelical raised friend you know, be like, hey, do you know that song I Wish We'd All Been Ready? And they will go, what? They'll either laugh or they will say, why did you remind me of this monstrosity? It's actually a really catchy pop song, but lyrically it was like, I mean, it along with other movies and books and stuff just fucked me up for many years. So that being said, Larry Norman rocks, you know?
He sort of, I mean, he like left, he was like at a point not aligned with any sort of official doctrine. He was kind of,
he was a rebel,
verging into like, a guy who had crazy ideas, and sure, they like originated in the Bible, but more or less he was just kind of out there, right?
Was he the guy who Paul McCartney said, if you drop the Jesus stuff, you can be a big star?
Yeah.
There is a doc out there for a Larry Norman doc that's floating around out there, Elizabeth.
Yeah, I think I don't know if it's called "Why Should the Devil Have All the Good Music." Is that what it's called?
Yeah,
I think it's supposed to be good. I actually have been meaning to watch it. I got to add that to my own personal Rock Docs Excel spreadsheet.
All right, maybe we'll bring you back for that one.
Okay, sure.
But today we're contractually obligated to talk about Iggy and the Stooges. Sort of the farthest thing.
Different than Larry Norman.
Different than Larry Norman. So, Dan, we we typically allow our guests to pick the film. In this case, this was your choice. So, why don't you tell us kind of why you picked this, and maybe like what's your relationship with Iggy Pop and the Stooges and that music?
Yeah. Okay. The reason, so I went through a phase, actually, during the time when Pretty Good Vibrations as an idea was like kind of gestating. During lockdown, I found myself really drawn to Rock Docs, which is why it's been fun to find your guys' show, because I've probably watched like 15 in the last 2 years or something like that. It's like maybe halfway through the semi-lockdown era. And I didn't really know why. Turns out what I think is that I was wanting to do a music-related project, and I eventually figured that out. But I just was watching a ton of these things. And I actually be curious what you guys think about the following point. I'll pause after this before I continue. Uh, whether one is good or not is often not so much about the filmmaker. Like you can have that, like the guys who did some kind of monster who like managed to pull that off, like their PR skills are incredible that, like they must be such people, but it's not like a really, I don't know, flashy filmmaking enterprise, right? It's a great story told really competently and straightforwardly. And in fact, the fact that it's kind of cinema verite makes it all the more powerful, because you're like, how the fuck do I get to be in the room with the Metallica guys for this? So anyway, unlike that, I was really struck by Gimme Danger. So when we were tweeting or messaging David, I was like, well, that was kind of a standout for me of this 15 or so film set that I watched. And I think the reason is that Jim Jarmusch is just an excellent filmmaker. And so all like the other one like this is the Todd Haynes Velvet Underground one that came out on Apple Plus 2021, I think. Like those two stood out to me as like, oh, these are filmmakers making a film about a band, where even the Scorsese stuff doesn't feel this stylized. And yeah, so that's kind of why I picked it. And I mean, so let me hear what you guys say before we talk about Iggy.
Andy?
Well, so I do agree that this movie is stylized, and Jim Jarmusch puts his print on it in that way.
Yeah,
it stands out to me in some ways, though, about like how little pretense it has. I mean, there is like no conceit to this movie. It is as straightforward,
like no scripting. Yeah,
it is as straightforward a rock doc as you're gonna find. It is like about Iggy, beginning to end. There's no like, the styling there. There's some flourishes. There's some flourishes in the filmmaking, but there's no digressions. There's no surprising twists. There's no, there's no like, oh well, we had a camera here when this odd thing happened, so like we're gonna give you 15 minutes of that odd thing. It's it's a sparse, straightforward, like backward-looking biography, which is a
like
little
a
surprising.
2-minute and 45-second Stooges track.
Yeah.
That's
You're
what I'm
right.
saying.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that's a good point. I just think that's a really good point.
Yeah, I don't think he's trying. I mean, there's certain things we could pick out and discuss. I mean, let's just kind of. I was actually thinking of a similar point before we started. Like, which docs have we talked about on the pod that are directed by people that are primarily known as filmmakers, and how do those, not that we. I mean, we could talk about that for hours, but like, you've got the Sparks Brothers, Edgar Wright, very stylized. I love that one. But people that are primarily known as, let's say, narrative, nonfiction filmmakers. Because I don't want to take anything away from people that just mainly do documentaries. But you've got Peter Jackson, Get Back. A little bit different because he's just working with that original footage, but obviously it has the Peter Jackson stamp of like the technological sheen,
all the processing,
and being 9 hours long. And seeing
in his wheelhouse lengthwise,
people go on this adventure climbing up to a roof. You've got the Peter Bogdanovich Running Down a Dream. You've got what am I not thinking about?
Scorsese,
Rolling Stone.
Scorsese.
We'll talk about Scorsese. We got the Pearl Jam one. That's
Cameron Crowe. Sure.
Cameron Crowe. I don't see a ton of.
I haven't seen that one. Yeah.
I don't see a ton of. I mean, I guess Cameron Crowe's milieu is that the kind of Seattle scene. So that kind of overlaps there. They each have their own kind of way. But yeah, this one doesn't have a ton of if I didn't see the title card, Jim Jarmusch, I don't know that I would assume that it was made by him specifically. There's no way I would know it was him specifically, nor would I necessarily think that it was made by like a filmmaker kind of slumming it and doing a rock doc. You know what I mean? Like sometimes you kind of get that
interesting.
I can take that out of the realm of the hypothetical and say that I watched this movie like 2 years ago and did not realize that it was made by Jim Jarmusch, nor made by an auteur director. It did not.
Yeah.
That did not stand out to me. And
did
to the point that when we rewatched it, I went, directed by Jim Jarmusch, and then you're dialed into it, and so I see the style more.
I can't go back to not knowing, right? Because there wasn't a time that I didn't know it was him. But I think you guys are hitting the nail on the head. But for whatever reason, just the really high competence and like just the sort of B-roll choices that he made, I thought especially was where he was having some fun with it. Like not necessarily anything that's being described in the words. You almost like look for the little Jarmusch connection that he's making with the visuals, which is always going parallel to whatever the talking head is speaking about or whatever. And I just thought it was a, real like concert footage, very deftly handled. The talking head stuff is actually a little jarring compared to sort of the rest of it as an artistic piece. But I did also notice that he has all of them in the least possible, least regal and cool least glamorous talking head spaces ever. Dude's in a fucking bathroom. Iggy Pop is in his laundry room. Like it is and I'm like, that's kind of Stooges. Like it's awesome. But I think because I knew it was him, I was picking up on all of those even the first time that I watched it. And I was going like, oh, we're not all the way to Todd Haynes' Velvet Underground, but we're in these kind of filmmaker hands. I don't know. That was just but it's interesting that you guys didn't really experience it that way.
Well, I mean, as a filmmaker, you're making choices, and that's one of the things we talk about with documentaries. It's like there's kind of a default. If you're like, I'm going to make a documentary, and that means like the person's going to be sitting in a room with like, like a Sears portrait backdrop, abstract behind them, or something, kind of generic, like sitting in a chair. That can be fine. But like the way you light somebody, the place you put somebody in, the circumstances in which they're interviewed, all matter, and it can contribute to the film, or it could be a whatever, or it can detract from the film. And here, I mean, it's like it works so well, and it also it disarms you. It makes it feel real, even if that's an illusion. It makes it feel like this is not a story about like people who succeeded on an unbelievable level. You know what I mean? Because in the beginning, I mean, even Iggy Pop, who's very successful, I'm sure he does not like live in a laundry room. You know what I mean? I'm sure he does okay. But it's not like if you're interviewing like Mick Jagger and he's sitting on a throne. You know what I mean? Like the story is going to turn into him becoming a billionaire or something. You know, it's
Right.
like really a rags to somewhat other rags kind of story for
Yeah.
most of these guys. And so
Yeah.
that like kind of helps tell the tale. Even though that's not really what happened in the life of Iggy, but I mean,
Yeah.
also, I mean, Jim as well. I mean, he, you know, Jim Williamson, he, you know, went on to quite a bit of success financially, or you know, in his career. So anyway, let me just kind of, I think maybe we should set the table for Jim Jarmusch. Maybe
Yeah,
I don't know if
it's
people
I think
like.
that's useful. I don't. He's not a household name, certainly.
Right. It's not like everybody knows Martin Scorsese or Peter Jackson. Like you can't not know,
Right.
even if you
Right.
haven't seen the Hobbit movies, you know, like
Yeah.
kind of what the deal is.
Yeah.
Are you guys both Jarmusch-heads or just checked a few out?
I check a few out. I liked Coffee and Cigarettes a lot.
Oh yeah. I would say I'm like halfway to a Jarmusch head.
Okay.
I'm just pulling up his IMDb here so I can see
Hmm.
which ones, but certainly like films of his, I would say they don't always hit for me, but when I love them, I really love them. And I am trying to
I will. Well, I'll proudly say that I'm a.
I
Pretty
suspected
heavy
you might
Jarmusch.
be. I suspected you might be.
I'm a.
You're a Jarmusch head? I
He's
mean, I'm
kind.
looking through here and I mean,
He's one of my guys.
I love Coffee and Cigarettes, Broken Flowers,
Flowers, yeah.
Patterson, and Gimme Danger. And
I mean,
then
that's if you like if you like 4 works
and
from
Dead
a
and
director.
Dead Man. I love Dead Man.
Dead Man's awesome.
That's a lot of
Ghost Dog?
films.
What's your?
Ghost Dog, yeah.
I saw that one so long ago. I need to rewatch it, and I need to see Down by Law and Stranger Than Paradise, which I haven't seen. So
remember.
I guess that I'm not a full Jarmusch head because I haven't gone to those early films.
I remember reading a review of Ghost Dog when it came out in 1999, and they called it a gangster samurai hip hop Eastern Western, and I was like, that I want to go see that movie.
Like you've described my tastes.
Yes, that's pretty much exactly what I'm looking for, and he was right. And yeah, I mean, I like some of these movies. I've quoted my friends for years. Mystery Train is, you know, I love just incredible. Down by Law. I mean, you've got Roberto Benigni, Tom Waits, and John Lurie like escaping from jail. And, it's just absolutely hilarious. Stranger Than Paradise is great. I'm a pretty deep head. He also did The Year of the Horse, which is the Neil Young live documentary from the 90s. That also was really great. So that's really his only other documentary work that I know of.
He did some music videos though. He did
Okay,
like a
yeah.
Raconteurs music video,
Yeah.
and also a Neil Young one. So yeah,
Got to cash a check once in a while.
Mhm.
So yeah, so his but his films are very much documentary style, I would say. You know, they're not flashy for the most part, not a lot of effects and things like that. I mean, he did like a zombie movie a few years ago called The Dead Don't Die, which is just hilarious, and also kind of like a bleak environmental parable, but wrapped up in a very hilarious oddball zombie movie. And like, you know, it's like, if it's not trying to dazzle you with the special effects budget. It's just you know, enough to kind of get the story across. And everything is like, seems to be shot on location, on the fly. Sometimes using non-actors. You know, he'll mix in professional, well-known actors and just random people on the street, and kind of catch what he can and assemble it. And you know, he's got this kind of hip 1970s New York style that he never, you know, that he came up in that world, the punk, you know, kind of world of the New York in the 70s, and he never really.
He's
kind
a
of
punk filmmaker. He really is, and I've never put that together. But that's a great description.
Yeah. I mean, the pairing of this artist and this director makes as much sense as any pairing that we've come through.
Yeah,
I would say.
Yeah, totally works. And I know Iggy's been in some of his movies as well. So
okay,
he's in Coffee and Cigarettes.
He's in Coffee and Cigarettes. Sure. He's in The Dead Don't Die. Which
that's almost like hilarious. Itself kind of that's meta.
Yeah,
just to have someone who looks like Iggy Pop in a zombie film. That's fucking great. That's great.
Yeah, his character's name is Male Coffee Zombie. He's just like, need coffee. It's hilarious. And obviously you don't need a lot of makeup to make Iggy Pop look like a zombie.
Not these days.
Yeah, so I guess one more piece of item that we usually get through is like, what is you guys' relationship with this Iggy and the Stooges music?
Mm-hmm.
Like something you've always been into, or just kind of getting into it, or I don't know.
So I remember very well my very first exposure to Iggy Pop. It was he was on Letterman in 2001, and I stayed up to watch it. I was like, I was like getting into music around that time, and I sort of had an idea that there was this guy Iggy Pop that I should digest at some point. Was a big Letterman fan. Figured, all right, I'll stick around and watch this tonight. I watched it. My dad was in the room, and my relatively conservative suburban dad was so confused. The level of confusion and dismay on his face about what this old man was doing on stage, shirtless, the back bends, all the Iggy stuff. And my dad just looked at me like I had put on like a smut film or something. And so of course I was like, well, I'm gonna get into Iggy a lot now. And luckily that was like the Napster era, and I went out and downloaded Be a Dog and Gimme Danger and all that stuff. And so I wouldn't say I'm like I wouldn't say I'm ahead, but I love a lot of that early stuff. I think it's great. I think it stands up beautifully today. I didn't like listen to the like later records really. I don't know if people have like strong opinions about the quality of those. I never really made my way to them though.
Dan, you kind of come from like the emo pop punk world, I guess.
Yeah, you could say that.
And so I don't know how this kind of music relates to that. I mean, it's nominally in the like very broad punk genre, but it sounds so different. I mean, vocally and just composition wise.
Yeah.
Is there do people in that world see a lineage there, or is it just like this is a different thing?
I don't think there's much of a lineage to the kind of emo pop punk world that I toured in. I am actually shocked that I did not get way into the Stooges a long time ago. I feel like I missed a window in college, like around the time of White Stripes, and I was listening to a lot of the Detroit Cobras and like that kind of garage rock revival that was going on. And I did get into some kind of proto punk stuff like the Stooges. I think that my memory is that I was kind of turned off by I Want to Be Your Dog. Like now I find that riff to be almost like Sabbath and proto Misfits kind of a thing that I appreciate now. But then like I think in college when I was still listening to a lot of like straight up pop punk and skate punk and stuff like that. Like I like the Pistols and the Clash and the Ramones, but I didn't go as deep. And then I watched, it might have been watching this, it might have been hearing a couple songs. And then there's that 2020 something remix by Iggy of Raw Power. And it's just like so fuzzy and the guitars are so loud and it sounds so awesome. Like a fuzzy auditory sleeping bag to just wrap yourself in while you're like thrashing about. So mixing my metaphors, but yeah. So I am like kind of falling in love with them for the first time in the last couple years, and I'm just like, how did I miss this?
Yeah, it's awesome.
That's cool. I should also add the movie Dogtown and Z-Boys features both Want to Be a Dog and Gimme Danger prominently, and both of those are like I see that movie when I hear those songs now.
I got into like Iggy and the Stooges like in college, so the 90s for me. And but I wasn't like super hardcore. Like I got like the original 3 records like at the used CD store or whatever. I was into it. And then Uncle Tupelo did like kind of a country-ish cover of Now I Want to Be Your Dog. And I was in a band called the Satchel Pages that
Nice. That's great.
That we would cover that cover,
Yeah.
which nobody knew, like whatever. We were the only people that knew that we were covering a cover, or even that it was a cover.
Yeah.
But and that was kind of, for whatever reason, was the one song that I sang in the set. I don't know why. I don't know. I don't remember much of what happened here, but I
Can we
suddenly
get
found
a
myself.
recording of that? Do we have that anywhere?
There may be a recording somewhere on a VHS tape in my garage or something somewhere. I don't know.
I'm trying not to put my. I'm a therapist also. I'm
Please.
trying not to put my therapist
No,
hat
please.
on for the fact that the only song you sang lead on was fucking "I Want to Be Your Dog."
The only song they would
In
let
the
bass
style of
player
Uncle
sing-
Tupelo.
That's okay. That softens it actually a bit. That
Yeah, it was
softens
kind of
it a
it was countrified.
Yeah.
It was like a two beat country kind of vibe.
okay.
And yeah, if you listen to the Uncle Tupelo cover, it was good and certainly probably much better than ours was. But anyway, we had fun with it. But yeah, so that was my Iggy moment. But I did not remove my shirt or do backbends or smear myself with peanut butter or jump in the crowd or anything like that. I
It's a
just would play
shame.
my bass
Such
and
a
sing my
shame.
little song, and a couple people would clap, and we'd move on with our life. Yeah, so that's my
The Satchel Pages. All right.
the Satchel Pages. Look it up. We're not on anything anywhere.
We're gonna drip out the history of your musical career over the course of many years on this show. We'll eventually get it all out, but you know it'll have to have been documented in some like fan made wiki. Just
Yeah, exactly.
one detail per 5 episodes for
Yeah.
15 years.
I was in a lot of random bands, so there's a lot of weird band names I could drip out just to keep it fun. Okay, so yeah, so I don't know. It's finally time to talk about the movie, I guess.
Let's dig
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
All right, Dan, why don't you start? Give us like kind of your kind of first impression of how the movie kind of gets rolling.
The first scene that I love is when he is describing where he was watching a show or something, and some person had a 25 words or less rule. Was
Yes.
that
Soupy Sales.
yeah, and that what I was thinking, like the simplicity of the Stooges' music is like that was such an effective sort of strategy from the get, right? Like
Mhm.
they very much stuck with that, and it's a good description of their music. But what I didn't put together until this rewatching is that like Iggy Pop does not ever seem that he is at a loss for words.
No.
The dude can fucking talk.
I've got some quotes written down over the course of the movie. He's
Okay,
got
good.
some absolute winners throughout this movie.
And he's like super erudite. He's like he's a dream subject for a documentary because he's got such interesting ideas that he expresses so compellingly in such rich language.
Yeah.
So the fact that he chose 25 words or less, he chose that. That was a serious choice, and I just think that is so cool to then watch him be this incredibly thoughtful guy who
Mhm.
can think of many more good lyrics than what he chooses to put in the songs. He
Yeah.
just chooses not to write them. I was just like, that is like next level.
So I'm a journalist, and in journalism school, I learned that it is against the law to ever write a lead of greater than 25 words. And that is a
Yeah.
teaching that I've brought to our newsroom, where it is a rule that all of our leads are less than 25 words. So
Yeah.
I was very pleased to learn that I can go to the newsroom and say that is the Iggy rule.
That is
officially from
such
here
a
on out.
cool
Soupy Sales,
connection.
Andrew
And that
Keefe's.
is and like just as like maybe the Stooges, do you guys think that this is true? In the entire punk, let's just call it the punk ecosphere, we could maybe go out to rock, but
Mhm.
let's go from proto-punk all the way to today. Is there a more cred cool band than the Stooges, or are they number one?
Yeah, I mean, like you could maybe Velvet Underground, right?
But they're so proto. I mean, they're 60s. You know, Velvet Underground, but okay, fine. So take all of rock history. Are the Stooges Mount Rushmore of like you want the other white people in your town to think you're cool? Wear a fucking Stooges shirt.
Yes.
Okay? And see how they look at you. I think they're top 4 of all rock bands. Like who else is on that list?
But
Velvets.
also that's because they never got like
Yeah.
I feel like 10 years ago Joy Division would have been that band, but then the shirt got so popular that now it became uncool. The Unknown Pleasure.
I think
shirt.
there's still. I think Joy Division's probably in that conversation for like new wave electronica stuff or whatever. But
Yeah.
All right.
I mean, Stooges. I think
no.
Velvets is another. That's they're on there.
To your point,
Sure,
David,
Fish,
it is.
of course.
It is.
That's about it.
Fish, Dave
Absolutely.
Matthews Band. That's the 4.
No, I hear what you're saying.
No, to your point though, David, it is interesting. Like the shape of this movie, begs for a level of like breakthrough fame that they never actually achieved.
Yeah.
You know, like the beats of the movie include a part where they're like gigantically famous, and that just like didn't happen actually, you know. So it's not in the movie, you know, but it is. You kind of are waiting for that to happen, even though you know the end and you know that that's not whatever occurs.
But they don't seem to resent that.
No, they don't. They do.
No.
I mean, if
seem
they
like
do,
we
they
did
hide
the coolest
it well.
thing ever. Why do we? What do we care what anybody else thinks?
It's crazy. Well, and to that end, Andrew, I think it's one of the clearest. It's certainly one of the most concise while still accurate presentations of what drugs can do to a band or a creative person.
Oh yeah.
Like they tell, there are 2 acts of that story, and they tell them very quickly, very straightforwardly, a little bit of visuals of Iggy kind of at his worst or whatever. But it's like, yeah, the band ended because we got into drugs.
Yeah. And
Like-
there's like no like romanticism. They don't even like,
No.
there's not even like sharing stories really. It's just
Nope.
like we
Just the beats
started
of the
using
story, yeah.
heroin and that doesn't work for being
Yeah.
a productive person. And so that was the end of the band. Boop, moving on, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
That's
yeah, it's
crazy.
wild. So, kind of setting the scene. I mean, basically, Iggy Pop, James Osterberg, grows up in a trailer with his parents by Ann Arbor, outside of Detroit. And he was a drummer and tells an amusing anecdote about how like his parents let him live in the master suite of the trailer because
So
it had
supportive.
room for
I
his
mean,
drum
I
kit.
thought my parents were supportive, but man,
Yeah.
the Osterbergs, they get the title.
Shout out to the Osterbergs, and they we don't really know anything about them. They don't tell us anything about them other than little bits. But Iggy seems like a sort of autodidact. He doesn't talk about reading a lot of books, but clearly the guy's read a lot of books. He doesn't ever. He's not like Frank Zappa, where he kind of grew up in the outskirts of town and whatever lower middle class circumstances or whatever. But like, and he didn't go to school so much, but except that like he always talked about how he went to the library and read every book, and he wore it on his sleeve. He was very proud of that. Iggy, he lets you know how well read and well rounded and worldly he is, but
Yeah.
in a subtle way. He's never dropping quotes. You know what I mean? He's not
No.
putting it in your face, but it's obviously there.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's like a dude that the best artists of any medium in the world want to hang out with him.
Yeah.
And he's spent like, even after it took like 2 years between the implosion of the Stooges and Iggy Pop being a world famous rock musician who is friends with Lou Reed and David Bowie. Like there was not a lot of gap there. And he's been he's been pretty famous and the coolest person in every room he's been in. Him and Andy Warhol vying for it. You know what I mean? Like for his whole fucking life.
Yeah.
So yeah, he doesn't have to flaunt it. He's like, yeah, dude, like presidents and NBA stars and everybody wants to be friends with me in the whole world. I'm the most credible punk musician ever.
He is sort of the prototype of a rock star in a weird way.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely. He also, I love that early on. I think we have a real clear parallel here where he says he fell in love with the mega clang at the Ford plant.
Yes, I love that.
The sound of the machines.
I think so. Dan, we watched a while ago the Lee Scratch Perry doc, and he talks about the sort of big resort developers coming in early in his life and like pulling rocks out of quarries, and that hearing rocks crashing against each other taught him the sound of reggae, basically.
Right, he created dub because he was just he heard the music was the rocks crashing against each other. He was just recreating it.
And so Iggy likes the mega clang
because of like a delay, like an echo.
He was on a unique vibration,
just like
I guess
like an elemental sound of just like natural elements,
like
crashing
the music
against
indie
each
rocks. Like
that's
if you don't hear it, that's your problem.
Yeah.
I think though reverb. I mean, if it was a quarry, you might hear
something like that.
And that's the dub sound is like that reverb and that delay, and then leaving a bunch of space. Right, that's the sort of sonic difference.
Right. So the natural side of Rastafari or whatever, you got that, and then on the other side you've got the machines, just stamping out, the same product one after the other as loudly and hot and sweaty as possible. That's the Stooges.
And
I thought at that point, I was like, I don't know if this is true. If this might be the kind of thing that he has kind of come to and developed over the years of retelling his story as a Detroiter.
Especially as a Detroiter.
But then I was like, I don't care if it's true. I can't believe this connection between their city and their like. This is incredible shit right here.
It is perfect, like rock doc lore to be like, well, it's not coincidental that I developed this sound in Detroit because I learned it at the Ford plant. But I do think there's like a really tidy parallel there that like, the early progenitor of punk didn't get it from music. He got it from machines,
industry.
And the person who did the same for reggae and dub didn't get it from music. He got it from the earth. There's like,
all right.
If we take them at face value, there's something there.
I think we squeezed everything out of that.
All right.
No,
okay. I could live there for a while, but I mean that's fine. Okay.
So Iggy falls in with these three guys, the Asheton brothers primarily, Ron Asheton, the guitar player, Scott Asheton, the drummer, as well as Dave Alexander, bass and guitar. We don't really learn a lot about their lives. They just seem like kind of not really degenerates, just kind of like guys, like, living on the outskirts of town, playing music. There's no talk about like career aspirations for any of these guys.
These are the world's forgotten boys.
They are.
As Iggy says in one of his absolutely beautiful rhetorical flourishes, people in their adulthood who had not lost their childhood.
Yes. So
Iggy.
Man, the main thing we learned about Ron growing up is that Ron's dad was in the military. Ron Scott's dad was in the military, and Ron and his dad bonded over collecting military paraphernalia. So Ron famously would wear like Nazi patches and iron crosses and things on stage, and like he claims that that the politics of it did not enter into his mind. Like it was clear, it was just.
I noticed that it went unremarked upon, the shot of his red Nazi armband, but that is a thing that punks in the UK did in the.
But this is like 10 years
70s.
before that.
I know it's 10. I mean, maybe they did it because of the Stooges.
Iggy's Jewish, and somehow that does not seem to be an issue. Like it just like it seems that Ron, everything I've ever seen about him, it seems sincere. Like they collected this stuff just like, I don't know. It's like you see stuff from ancient Rome. You know what I mean? You're not thinking about the politics of like this tribe versus that whatever, right? It's just like
except
cool.
that Hitler is.
Well, I know. I'm not. Listen, I'm not.
That's kind of where they.
If I was going to come out pro Hitler, this would not be the podcast in which I would do it.
No, I think, but that's a moment where they do seem like, okay, yeah, these dudes are like, these are just dudes, like
kids.
These are kids.
Yeah,
these are just kind of kids with no future.
Yeah, it's like kids being into dumb, like just trying to shock people in a way,
right?
But what they channel through their
punk to shock. Like if you want to be a shocking punk today, like you can go to the mall and buy the punk outfit.
Yeah, there's a whole section
tomorrow.
Yeah,
every town and
Spencer's,
city,
Hot Topic, you got it.
Whatever, or even if you like really want to go full crust punk, whatever. Like the infrastructure is there for you. You don't have to invent it.
Egg yolks for your Liberty Spikes, whatever. Yeah,
exactly. Like that's all.
Is that what people? I think that's what people use.
There was no Warped Tour. There's no nothing back then. It's just these guys had to invent the concept. This was like 10 years before the Ramones. Like nobody's thought of this.
I was trying to gather like what would like would the shock or understanding of that be different then? Would it be greater or less than it would be now? I have no sense of
The
like what
Nazi
the
stuff.
what the level of
It
shock and
must have
outrage would be.
been. It must have been less in some way. Just that they could have gotten away with it at the time, and the Pistols and all
Just
those.
right.
You know what I mean? It just must be like we were raised on Schindler's List and like pieces
Yeah.
of media that were really, I don't
Yeah.
know, very. If you're like, and then of course Star Wars, that all leans very Nazi SS, right?
I mean, I think probably a lot of
yeah.
dads who fought in World War II came back with trophies.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
They
And
just
it was
had
like,
this
hey, we
stuff.
kicked these guys' ass. And now
Interesting.
you wouldn't.
Yeah,
Now, if
interesting.
you have Nazi trophies, you're probably not a good dude. You're hanging out with Clarence Thomas.
Yeah, you're
But
listening to InfoWars.
exactly. But if you're, but in those days, maybe it was just like, well, we collected bounty from the war and we
Interesting.
got it, and
I don't know.
and
I could
people
see
probably
that.
weren't thinking of the politics in the same way. So,
But they obviously are trying to be shocking. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not a great. It's definitely not a great look today. And I was like, yeah, they just walked right past that Nazi armband.
all
there.
right.
Well, and so to transition here is, Iggy again. Like there is nothing, no amount of self-awareness that he lacks. This is a man who he sees himself
Yeah.
completely, and so he mentions getting these early gigs, and he says basically that he was getting these gigs so that these Chicago bluesmen could play to a white audience.
Yeah.
That was why he was hired.
He's there to code switch. Basically,
He's there to help them.
He's there to be an integrated band instead of an all black band.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if he knew that at 20 or he, is worldwide now and recognizes it now.
It sounds like, he sounds like he knew it then. Like he realized,
does,
oh, that's the only reason I'm here. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I know I'm not the best drummer, but I guess I can.
Yeah.
I can do it enough to help them get to this gig.
That's a pretty rare,
Yeah.
American experience to have that inversion.
Yes.
And
totally.
to be the token white person.
Yeah.
Right. Like that's certainly not the norm,
Right.
the way we do things here. And that's an interesting, they didn't linger on that either. Like, it's not clear if that really had anything to do with the music they ended up writing.
Yeah.
It does seem like he liked some of their chops or whatever, of course.
Totally. And there is, I was thinking about, we just watched a Little Richard doc, and, certainly
that's cool.
There's the Jimi Hendrix playing with him early in his career, James Brown playing with him early in his career, all that stuff. I do. And even if you think about like the Eagles doc, and you have Glenn Frey playing with Bob Seger when he's a little kid, and Don Henley playing with Kenny Rogers early in his career, there's sort of like, there is this like history of these early rock guys doing like an 18-year-old apprenticeship with people who already have the chops and are playing a different type of show. And
Jason Isbell.
Yeah, sure, Jason Isbell, right? Like you learn a lot, and then later you do your thing. You find what you actually want to do with it. You develop your taste.
Yeah.
But you've already got the chops, and you already know how to be a professional.
That kind of apprenticeship is just increasingly rare. It feels like outside of the trades, in our culture. But it's like, it's just kind of obviously a very wise model for getting good at something. Be around someone else who's really good at it for a long time before you, we could probably use a lot more apprenticeship. I don't know.
Yeah.
I want to apprentice. Like, where was my podcasting apprentice? But actually, so I'm still a psychology student. I'll be a doctor in a couple years here. But like, I have a supervisor, and I am basically apprenticing under him, and he teaches me a ton, and it's awesome. So maybe, I guess I am. I got my own little version of it.
Yeah.
I mean, Andy, you take young journalists under your wing from time to time.
I wish I could do more for them. I wish I wish they could get a better mentor, but I do what I can.
Yeah. So, all right. So, I mean, basically, it rolls through the story. I mean, these guys finally get together. They decide to call themselves the Stooges. There's a comedic episode with where was it Ron who called Moe Howard of the Stooges?
Yeah.
Because they were called the They're called the
Yeah.
Psychedelic Stooges, and this is, of course, the day, like 66, 7, whatever,
Yeah.
when you could like put a band together called the Psychedelic insert whatever, and next thing you know, you're on the bill with like Hot Tuna or whoever, you know, like you're just on. It seems like very in those days the bar to get on the bill with the MC5 and you know Mitch Ryder and whoever, like
Seriously.
you could just do it. You know, there weren't so many layers. But they decide eventually to just call themselves the Stooges. Ron finds Moe Howard of the Stooges. Moe finds his number, I guess, in a phone book, calls him up and says, "Hey,
Incredible story.
do you mind if I'm in a rock and roll band in Detroit? Do you mind if we call ourselves the Stooges?" Moe says, like, as long as you don't call your band the Three Stooges, I don't give a fuck what you call yourself.
As long as it's not.
So that is like might be the single best conversation about copyright that has ever happened in music or film.
It's awesome, and it's so
as long as you don't call your band the Three Stooges, I don't fucking care.
It's animated. There's a couple little animations in this movie which are really charming and good, but yeah, that's animated and it's so good. And again, it's also a thing like where you know Moe of the Three Stooges is a big star. You know, like everybody knows
Huge
who
star.
even now, but back then everybody knew who he was, and you could just call the guy up.
Insane.
Like, and he's probably 60. Like
just
at
give
the time,
Tom Hanks a quick call.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Make sure you can call your band Castaway.
Yeah, exactly. Like, hey, Tom Hanks, do you mind if I call my band Forrest Gump? Like, you can't just call him up. There's 25 layers of people.
Yeah, that's insane.
Yeah. Also, Moe Howard, frankly, doesn't have the right to grant the use.
No, legally,
right.
He
doesn't. They thought of that.
Like, tell a lawyer, like, no. I see your concern. I talked to Moe Howard. He said it's cool. Like, sir, that's immaterial.
Moe told me to fuck off. It's fine.
There's also in that early part, there's a great scene where it's the process that Iggy went through one day to get to band practice.
Yeah.
I wrote the steps down. I thought it might be fun to replay it here. So in order to get to band practice one day, he digs up his bag of weed, which is in his parents' backyard. That's where he keeps it so that it will stay. Nobody will take it or confiscate it. He takes a 45-minute bus
from Ann Arbor to Detroit.
From Ann Arbor to Detroit. He has to get the drummer awake by throwing rocks at his window.
Or spraying the hose.
Or spraying the hose if the window's open. Yeah, exactly. It takes like 2 hours to get everybody finally rehearsing, and then 30 minutes later, the mom comes home and tells them to stop. And I was like, it was so funny. It's also a very recognizable example of the lengths you'll go to play rock music when you are a teenager or 20 years old.
Yeah.
Like you will I just would like wait for the bus for so long, walk so far to do things like, wow. Like I'm so fucking lazy compared to my 16-year-old self, 15, like right before a car, you know? Oh my gosh. That was really warming for me. I loved that part.
And the funny thing is that like these guys live at their house with their mom, and then fast forward to 35 years later when the band reunites like for Coachella in 2003 or whatever, and Iggy decides to get the band back together, and he calls the same phone number that he remembers from 1966, and they're still there. Like it's like, hey, this is Iggy, can you put on Scott and Ron? I would like to get the band back together. And the mom was like stoked about it.
The mom's like matchmaking, making sure it happens.
What, like these guys just never left that that world. It's incredible.
Speaking of, I had one other note kind of related where the part where they get the house, I think it's when they're working on, is that the first or the second record, when they get the cheap house and they're all living there and writing songs?
I think the second.
It might be the second record. Anyway, that made me so nostalgic for my days in Sherwood. Like, I don't feel sad that often about not being in a touring rock band anymore. Like other parts of life have made that, really not that appetizing overall. But dude, that aspect, I mean, like we rented a house in Mexico on the beach one time because it was cheaper than California where we lived for 6 weeks and wrote a record. I mean, we lived in an RV all the time, which that was actually a little bit tight. But man, yeah, we rented houses and made records and lived communally basically for 8 years, maybe 9. And I just kind of miss that, you know? I mean, I like my mortgage, don't get me wrong. I'm happy with my life, but I really miss that. And this kind of brought me back.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this could bring you back to like just hanging out with your friends, even if you weren't in a band. You know what I mean? But like that type of like time in your life, whether it's college or before, high school or whatever, that when you were young and living with your friends and you had like no responsibilities and no money and no, you know what I mean? Like nobody had any like whatever.
Stop describing this, David. You're bumming me out, man.
It's real, but I mean that's part of the thing, And Iggy's very into the fact that they were all communists in the sense that they shared everything, not like political.
Yeah,
but
he's careful to mention that. He's like,
he's really not political at all.
Yeah,
I mean, at least he wasn't. I don't know what he's like now.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
And rightfully so, he does not seem to be like on Twitter or anything like that. He's just, keeps.
So he also during this early section describes sort of, I guess the way he makes it sound is that he sort of just preternaturally arrives at the idea of dancing like the way a chimp acts before it gets in a fight. And that's where that's where his stage persona comes from. And he says that he just noticed that the moment he started doing it, that the Ashetons came alive.
Yes, I wrote that down. That was my next note, was like, I love the idea that his like raw movement expression, like not connected to anything sonic. He's like, oh, I'm going to be like an ape. That basically made punk.
Yeah.
That like the sonic approach of punk came because one dude was dancing like an ape, and it got his friends pumped up, and they started playing louder and faster. And it's just like, that is, I don't know, that just made me so happy to think about.
Quote, in the Ashetons, I found primitive man. I mean, come on.
These are great quotes.
Are you kidding me?
Oh,
this is how he talks.
It's incredible.
Unbelievable.
It's unbelievable.
It does make me feel like watching this like that. I wish there were 1,000 documentaries where he talks. I wish we had, just him going on about stuff. Like, there's interviews of him out there, whatever, but like, I don't think he ever wrote a book. Like, I just would love to hear more from that guy, because like later in the film, he's talking about James Williamson joins the band, guitar player, and he kind of brings a new sound for the third record. And Iggy goes on this jag where he's talking about the sound of James playing the guitar, and he's just playing chords, right? He's not like playing, like Yes or some kind of, Rush or something like that, right? He's playing like power chords, but the way that he plays them is very distinctive. And talking about how like James found every nook and cranny of the sound that he could fill up and articulate, and there were no ideas left to be had, and it was very difficult for him to sing over it because there was no sonic space, and he had to sing an octave higher and just try to find nooks and crannies that he could find ideas that had not already been explored by James. And again, if you look at it, it's just the guy's playing the most basic power chord in the world, and yet it does sound like that, and it is unique and interesting, and it's like nobody puts that much thought into these things. And it was like, this guy is maybe like the best music critic there is that we have, and we have tiny snatches of him doing it, but like he could do that and be the best at it. You know what I mean? Like, give this guy a podcast where he just like reviews records or something.
Yeah,
it would be incredible. And so just the fact that we have this is so, like, the little moments of that we get of that in this movie are so. Maybe it's just because he's been thinking about that particular thing for 50 years when the when the movie comes along, so he can articulate it so well. But you just get the sense that you could play any record for him and he could say something insightful and interesting that would just blow your mind.
He did write a book about the Stooges story. It's called Total Chaos.
Oh, okay.
And it is the story of the Stooges as told by Iggy Pop. It looks like it came out, that the paperback came out in 2022.
Oh,
so this
recently.
Is fair, and there probably was hardcover before that. Maybe, I'm not sure, but
maybe he's on a book tour and we can get him.
Yeah, I was gonna say maybe he's on.
Dan,
a book
get
tour.
off. We're getting Iggy. Yeah. Sorry,
seriously.
Yeah.
I guess it's like a lot of like full page photos and stuff. It's like a
Okay.
very
Well,
looks like a pretty cool book actually.
Once again, I didn't do my
Yeah,
research and
that's okay.
showing my ass.
Well, and it's last year. I mean,
Yeah.
it came out on my birthday last year. Wow.
Oh, I could have got it for you as your birthday gift, but I didn't know who the hell you were.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just I don't know. I don't think we have to go through the whole story because basically like they try and fail and try and fail and try and fail. I mean, you know what
drugs,
it is.
Yeah.
But let's just go through some of our other favorite parts and quotes and things like that. Andy, I know you've got some other in the chamber there.
I got one here that their first album, the idea was that they only had 4 songs and each song was going to be 2 minutes and then they were just going to improv after it for 10. And so my question is, forget about punk. Are they a jam band? Are they the second jam band?
The second jam band?
Well, I mean, the Dead are a little.
I guess the Dead are
already going.
Yeah.
I guess the Dead are already going. Okay, yeah, sure. Right. Proto Dead.
Yeah.
67,
maybe.
60,
now, granted, they get chased off this idea by a record store owner. Like a record store owner is just like, nah.
It kind of ends up like that. The record still has a lot of jamming on it.
Yeah.
I went and listened to the first 2 records as I was at those points in the film this last time.
Yeah.
Just to kind of, I didn't go further. I knew the raw power stuff a lot better. And so when I was listening to that first record, including, I Want to Be Your Dog, but really a lot of the record, it makes the most sense as an album when you think of it through the lens of it was produced by John Cale.
John Cale, yeah.
From Velvet Underground. Like his influence on there is so strong, all these droney stuff and whatever, and the string arrangements and stuff like that. And so what I wrote down is that this is where the Velvet Underground to punk link becomes clearest, because I can't always hear that.
Yeah.
And it's like the Stooges are the midway point between the Velvet Underground and Black Flag, basically.
It's often I have to make that connection, I just have to be like, well, Lou Reed he kept hanging around downtown for years, and so
That's
he was
true.
there, but you're right that this does help make that connection more explicit. I agree. It also, you just get to you just see this lineage. All of a sudden the Stooges slot into this downtown New York lineage so neatly, thanks to John Cale. And then down to, running back and writing 4 songs in an afternoon and at the Chelsea Hotel and all that stuff. It's great
Yeah,
stories.
it is kind of the classic thing of a band is playing gigs, many gigs a week for a couple of years, gets into the studio, they have 3 songs. What is happening during these gigs? You know what I mean? It's
a lot of covers.
We've been rehearsing for years and years and years, and
yeah,
we knew 2 songs.
Right.
It seems to come up a lot in the early days of rock and roll.
Yes.
I guess the demands. I guess the sets were short. You would do a 20-minute set.
Yeah,
so,
you play with 5 bands a night or something like that.
Yeah, the idea of having to fill up both sides of an album was daunting.
Yeah. I like he's got a quote here. Some of the biggest California 5 years of love acts were created in a meeting, and stuff smells. It still smells.
So
and
good.
Then cut right to Marrakesh Express.
Yeah.
Just CSNY catching a stray.
That's also reminiscent of Moe Tucker in the Velvet's doc, where she just absolutely lights the hippies on fire.
Yeah, and particularly
2021.
Yes, just being like that. All the California shit was bullshit.
Yeah. Such a counter narrative there.
Right. Also, so he says basically Detroit was a big thing because it was halfway between New York and San Francisco. Now, granted, so is Cleveland, so is Chicago, so is St. Louis. It doesn't get me that way much further to an explanation of why Detroit punches above its weight as a rock town.
Yeah.
But whatever. I'm not going to argue with Iggy. He's probably got a better sense of how true that is than I do.
His general kind of approach to politics, authority structures, there's a libertarian and kind of conspiratorial streak in punk rock.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah.
That I didn't really see until I was, out of it and in my 20s. and sometimes some of the people we would be on tour with, frankly. But like that's there in Iggy too. Like so much of what makes punk is there. Like I wrote down that 100% of what a true punk vocalist requires in a punk rock band, Iggy had all of it 10, 12 years earlier.
Yeah.
It's like there's nothing you need to add for any of the great punk vocalists that is not there in Iggy. It's incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And he was not, I mean, they were the little brother band of the MC5.
Right.
And like everybody called them that. But the MC5 were explicitly political. And the Stooges refused to be. And it all kind of came to a head apparently like in the 1968 Chicago Democratic Convention when the MC5 were going to go out there and kick out the jams, and Iggy and them flat out refused to go. You know, basically like, I don't know, were they too cool for it, or were they like, we saw that this was just a TV whatever scam?
I have friends in bands who are like this, that they like, I recognize this attitude from the punk scene, and I recognize it in some of my friends who are kind of anti-institutional. They'd rather kind of have their own ideas. They don't really trust the accepted wisdom of things. They don't follow politics at all unless it's some really crazy story. They just are like, they just kind of want to be apart from it. And that's like totally there in Iggy. And I am pretty ambivalent about that. Like I am getting a doctorate. I'm an institutions man. Like I follow the APA ethics code. Like I'm like really into science, which is very institutional. And so it's weird. Like it makes me sort of struggle with those parts of myself in my story.
Yeah. It's like they get to be that cool. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like they get to stand off of everything and be the Stooges, and because they don't have to interact with the world.
Well, so one thing I'll say here is at this part of the movie, particularly they talk about the 2 nights of shows in like LA and the Fillmore in San Francisco.
Yeah.
I think it's starting to become a weakness of the movie at this point that they don't have much footage of the Stooges in these early performances. Because they're talking about how unusual the band was compared to everything else you'd see. And we get a lot of people chiming in to say, like, yeah, it's true. They were different, but we don't get to see much of those early performances.
I mean, but devil's advocate is after 15 iterations of Iggy on stage.
Yeah.
Like, is there more you need to know or see? Like, it's all kind of there in a lot of these 30-second clips. Like, it's all there. Like, you see pretty much the.
My sense is that those are mostly later clips, though. Like, I don't think we get a lot of like clips in the 60s.
Yeah,
they must be. Yeah, they must be.
There's very little footage of the early stuff, and that was also a thing with the Velvet Stock. There's almost no live footage of them, and that's partly why the director Todd Haynes had to create such a weird interesting visual style.
Turn it into a Warhol art film.
Yeah, which was I think great. And so great. Jarmusch doesn't really take the same approach. He just kind of like barrels forward with what he's got.
Right.
Which
I think though that's probably where the creative B-roll stuff is probably born out of that particular problem.
Yep, totally.
So I like where he went with that. I think that was a cool creative solution. Yeah.
There's not a lot of other. This isn't the type of documentary where you get a ton of like, Dave Grohl popping up to tell you how cool Iggy and the Stooges were. You don't really get that. Everybody's directly involved. So you get Danny Field, who is their manager, and he was also manager for the Ramones. And you get like little clips of him. And he seems like a very emotional guy. He just seems like the second he heard this band, and he specifically says that he heard them before he saw them because he was like walking up to the door.
Which I thought was a cool detail because Iggy's so visual.
It wasn't the visual. It was the sound. The second he heard them, he knew immediately that this was the coolest band that there ever could be, and they were the greatest. And he never wavers off of that like line for 1 second, and he's just disappointed and sad anytime anybody in the world, like in the record industry or whatever, doesn't hear it.
That's
he tells a story about like the third album or whatever they're getting ready, and this other, they played the music and with this other record executive and the guy, they go back to the hotel and the guy just said, I didn't hear anything. And Danny Field, contemporary being interviewed, is just like, what? This is the greatest band there ever could be. Like, what do you mean you didn't hear anything? And it's like, he's not mad about it. He seems like he's almost going to cry. Like he's so passionate about this art that's being created for him. And he talks about how he felt the same way basically about the Ramones, that, it just breaks his heart that if everybody doesn't see it the same way he does. And it's kind of sweet. I mean, you don't get a lot of him talking about the machinations of the record business. That's not the kind of manager, you get those sometimes, the Irving Azoff or whatever type of guys in rock docs where it's like all about how they cut this great deal or they, whatever. This is not that at all. It is just a guy who is truly passionate and just wanted to devote his life to being a prophet for this kind of art.
So
that's how he comes off, at least.
I'm interested in whether you guys got the same sense. Does Bowie come off not all that great in this movie to you guys? It seems like opportunistic and like it wasn't really a great bag for the Stooges working with him.
Yeah, like he was collecting cool people around him, and then when he wanted to move
saw
on to his
who
own
was
shit,
cool. Yeah.
he was like, "Oh, cool! I got an Iggy Pop. I've got the Stooges," and he did some work producing the album, and then he kind of like pieced out and went off to do his own thing, and left them with studio time, which they used, but doesn't really seem like he was there contributing. Now the flip side is kind of like Lou Reed's Transformer album, where like Bowie almost takes over and makes it a David Bowie album, So it could go either way, Maybe he doesn't get a fair shake in either direction, but yeah, he doesn't necessarily come off great in the.
But this was happening at the same time, and it does come off as like Bowie has the taste to see who out there in the U.S. is cool and interesting, and he's getting some of that shine on himself just by associating with them, and opportunistically, I think it kind of comes off is the impression of this movie or the impression of the Stooges. I'm not exactly sure which.
I didn't get that sense, but it might be that I'm more amenable to that kind of a life.
Yeah.
Not to say that I have lived it. I have never, by any stretch of the imagination, been cool.
Wait till this episode drops, Dan.
Hey, yeah, I'm getting my reputation ready to burnish it here. Bad visual joke for an audio format there, Dan. Jeez Louise. I'm a great podcaster, guys. Trust me, listeners. I forgot what I was going to say.
All right. We're talking about David Bowie.
That like the idea of basically Justin Vernon from Bon Iver lives this kind of life. And I did a big 2-parter episode walking through his career 2+ hours with my friend Kristen, who's fucking hilarious. And the life that guy lives today is basically the life that Bowie was living in the 70s, which is Justin can make any art he wants, and he prefers to do it collaboratively. And he has a compound in Wisconsin where anybody who's willing to fly out there, they can stay, they have a fully functioning studio, make records. He's constantly guesting on other people's songs. He's constantly starting collaborative bands with other musicians. And then like a third of his time, he seems to be working on Bon Iver. And like that to me is, as a creative person, like that's my happy place. That's my zen. That sounds like the best life ever. And I can't get there as a therapist. It's not available to me, but like I just think that's kind of what Bowie's doing. So maybe I'm not as quick to judge it. Not that you're being judgmental, but just that like I go, oh, I would sign up for that life in a hot second. Maybe if my kids were old enough or something. But incredible.
Yeah. I just get the sense that Iggy saw it that way. That Iggy saw it as like, it wasn't.
I could buy that.
It wasn't really that cool a thing, I don't know. But maybe I got more out of it than was there. But then Iggy does say, I think I helped wipe out the 60s.
That line.
Yeah. So good. I just want to point out that Iggy then did go on to do 2 albums with like his two biggest albums in the late
Yeah,
70s
with
were
Bowie.
Bowie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
Lust for Life and The Idiot. So like it's not like the movie
And Raw
kind of makes it
Power
seem
was a Bowie. The original mix is a David Bowie mix. I
right.
don't know. I didn't look into how involved he was, but he was somewhat involved on Raw Power, their biggest record.
Right. It is. Yeah. The movie does kind of give very short attention to Bowie and his collaboration, and I don't really know why.
Not a ton of attention to Lou Reed either. I mean, he's basically the who mentions it, like the story about Nico talking about Lou,
right?
Yeah,
and then maybe one other time he's like flashes on screen maybe twice.
Right.
So
yeah, we
Like
get
a
more time
Stooges
with like
song,
Jay
concise.
Mascis than we do with Lou Reed.
Yeah, we'll have to hit up the Joker Man and get some
and Mike Watt,
get the
yeah,
Lou
And
Reed,
Mike Watt, yeah.
Iggy Pop thing. Yeah, Mike. I want to get to Mike Watt because I
Okay.
love Mike Watt. Huge
Yeah.
fan. Andy and I have been talking about doing the Minutemen documentary. Doing
We Jam
episode about that.
Econo.
I rewatched
Yeah.
it recently. Mike Watt is incredible. Anytime he shows up in a documentary or anything, it's like you get the pure, undiluted Mike Watt experience. He is a beautiful person.
Agreed.
You cannot not love him.
He's got like
And
no filter, basically.
no filter, and just seems like the most, just loving guy. And so basically the band breaks up. They just kind of all falls apart between drugs and failure and everything else, death, etc. The original bass player, passed away, and there's kind of a long rambling story that we don't have to reiterate about how one thing led to another, and some of these guys started getting back together and doing this and doing that and the other thing. One thing leads to another, and eventually Mike Watt gets Jay Mascis from Dinosaur Jr. and the Asheton brothers together, and they start touring and playing basically Stooges songs. And then Iggy kind of comes into the fold, and so then the Stooges essentially reunite in the early 2000s for Coachella, and then go on to tour and things like that. So Mike Watt at all times during this reunion was the bass player, basically, and then the two Asheton brothers are the rest of the band, and then when Ron Asheton dies, the guitar player, they bring back James Williamson, who is the guitar player for, I'm saying, the third album. Now James Williamson, he's the guy I was talking about, the guitar player who filled up every space, blah blah blah. He played on the third album in '73, and then when the band ended, he was like, he talks about how he was recording, became a producer. He was looking for a job. He started producing bands, but he didn't really like it, but he was into the gear, and he went back to school, and he ended up becoming like a software engineer and working for like Sony and all these other big companies, and became like a tech guy, and like had a 30-year tech career.
Crazy.
Yeah.
And
there's like there's a little photo of him like at his like white collar nerdiest, like he's like he should be on like a realtor bus ad or something.
Yes.
Right.
That photo is incredible. I'm so glad Jarmusch just kept that in. Not commenting on it, just leave it there.
Yeah, he looks a little bit like Dilbert.
Yeah. Like, the guy from the Stooges, this nerd here.
Yeah,
right,
the blandest white boomer you can imagine.
Right, exactly. Just in a bad shirt and tie and whatever.
Played Search and Destroy. I mean,
so then after Ron passed away, then he gets recruited. He's recently retired from his tech career and exited, and like probably sitting on a pile of dough. And Iggy calls him up and asks him if he wants to be with the Stooges, and he's like, I haven't picked up guitar in 27 years. And Iggy's like, well, whatever, and he just gets back, and boom, the band gets back together. And it seems like basically they kept it going for a few years. They did record a few albums, which I remember like there's 2 reunion albums in the 2000s. I remember like listening to them at the time like once or twice and being like, okay, yeah, it's kind of like the Stooges, but whatever.
Kind of what happens, yeah.
And that's fine. Maybe there's undiscovered gems in there to be found. Sure. But it never grabbed me. And
I'm working on a Weezer episode right now, by the way, of their entire a bracket of all their albums against each other. And I'm listening to every album, the last 10 or whatever. And there are some gems, man. There are some gems and some jams.
Okay.
I say to you, look forward to this episode.
All right.
I have become Dan the Baptist, preparing the way for Weezer. Sorry, David, I got these Christian jokes.
No, it's fine.
New Testament jokes, man. I'm way off here.
There's a New Testament? I should check that out.
Read the Room. Yeah. Okay.
Put that on your reading list along with Iggy's book. The 2 new books we learned about today.
2 books I've not
Iggy's
heard about.
book,
Iggy
New
has
Testament.
a book, and Jesus. Wow. All my favorite authors. Long-haired guys who,
Hey,
I like
there's some
like to party.
overlaps. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Dance like a chimp before it's about to fight.
Yeah. So there's not a ton in the movie about the reunions and all that stuff. It's just
which is good.
There's a funny
you don't
bit
need
where
much.
Iggy talks about how like they got invited to play Coachella and he got offered a certain amount of money that he thought was like fair for an Iggy Pop show, but he's like,
Yeah.
but the Stooges, this was gonna be their first reunion show in like 30 whatever years, and he's like, but the Stooges were communists, so I had to ask them for 3 times as much money, and they gave it to us. It's just hilarious, and you really get the sense that like the Coachella gig they played in 2003 or whatever was probably equaled more money than the entire
they'd ever made
original
for sure.
career of the Stooges had ever.
Yeah,
grossed.
I mean, maybe not with all the record sales and stuff, but it's not like they probably never even sold their, it's like a steady underground kind of a thing. I'm sure they needed to do other work to make a living, even,
Yeah, I mean, I know they had commercial placements and things like that.
Yeah.
And
and Iggy had a solo record, and
Well, no, Iggy did, but the Stooges stuff was always, they said, equally split. So like if
yeah,
Search and Destroy
yeah,
is in a whatever Adidas commercial or
it's
something, they're all
it's in
getting
a Wes Anderson film.
Yeah,
for
sure. So
instance.
they're all getting some checks from time to time. Maybe that was keeping up the old
Yeah,
house where they live with their mom
who
in
knows?
Detroit.
Yeah. I know,
Uh,
seriously.
but
Where they still lived, yeah.
yeah. So yeah, that's, I mean, so just kind of like comes to an end, I guess. This is
It does. It does. Sort of check. It is you're checking the runtime and you're like, oh, okay, there's only 20 minutes left in this movie. All of a sudden, you know.
Which I think is
okay.
right, because there's not an, like, he's not faking an arc, basically.
Right. Which happens. That does
Does
happen
happen.
in some movies.
Yeah. Sometimes it's forced.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, unfortunately, Iggy really is the only remaining of the original Stooges with us. And I mean, obviously, Iggy will never die. So he's gonna
he will
outlive us all.
become the Crypt Keeper and be around for another 100 years. Yeah.
He's gonna turn off the lights at the end of the universe when the universe achieves heat death and no information can be passed between the remaining neutrons. Iggy will be there to sweep up and say goodnight to everybody.
Gosh.
Yeah, he's 76. Incredible.
Iggy Pop will be the last person who remembers his own band. No one else will remember his band.
You can do it all over again. Hey, I came up with an idea for a new song. It's called
You
I Want to Be Your Dog.
you outlive all your fans and their grandchildren, and then you go, okay, I can finally go. Nobody knows the Stooges anymore.
It's the plot of Yesterday, but it's Iggy playing Iggy and the Stooges to a world that has forgotten.
To a world that doesn't know that they existed.
Just doing the songs again, and people are like, this is good.
Guys should record.
Gosh, you can't. That movie is impossible because you can't figure out how the world works, and so you can't just enjoy the story. Here's like, wait, so there's no Beatles, but like there's the stuff. Like, how are there the Beach Boys? And it just doesn't make sense. You got to follow it further.
The thought I was having is like, how many conversation, like meaningful, important conversations in your life, particularly when you're in like high school or college, did you have with somebody about the Beatles?
Right.
Where you're like, I'll never forget that time I drove to, Marcy's house with Mike, and we were listening to Eleanor Rigby.
Yeah.
What happens to that memory of yours?
If the world changes because
yesterday.
Yeah.
What that memory of you and your friend
the
driving listening to the
gets
Beatles?
Incepted.
What
or I don't know.
I've never seen this movie, so I just know
you don't need to see it.
Has anybody seen it? I don't know. It seems
I saw it. My mom wanted to see it. I saw it.
Okay.
Do
it for mom. All right. What else?
Because I am not the world's forgotten boy. I'm known and remembered by my mother.
Okay, good. I'm glad to know. Is there any more juice to squeeze out of this documentary? Any quotes? Any bits we've forgotten? Because there's so much.
I got through all my notes personally.
Yeah, I don't have any more quotes down here.
All right, it's a rich text.
Let's do the question.
Do the question. Okay, the question. The
question
is,
soon we need to start deciding whether we need to keep asking this question because we do answer it the same way every time.
Mostly we do answer the same way, and it's kind of dumb. But the question is, Dan, you're talking to somebody, they're not particularly a fan one way or the other of the Stooges or Iggy or Jim Jarmusch, and they're just like, "Hey, I heard about Gimme Danger. Is that a film I should watch tonight?" Would you recommend this movie, or do you have to be ahead of the? You have to be into the whole thing to
I would
appreciate it.
I would say you have to be at least into rock docs. I would say this one, unlike something like The Last Waltz or, some of these other auteur-made films, this one, like, if you're not interested in the Stooges or early punk or that kind of Lester Bangs kind of rock world, then you could definitely skip it. I mean, it's very competently made, but I wouldn't recommend it. I think once you're like, I like rock bands and the history of rock and movies about rock, like, yeah, you should, you will enjoy this film. But interestingly, it sounds like you guys didn't particularly like it the first time you watched it anyway. I got a bit more maybe this on the second watch.
I kind of forgot it. It sort of just, it was, it didn't stick with me the first time through. It did much more this time around. In fact, as I was watching it the second time, I was like, did I make it all the way through last time? Because I do not remember a lot of this. So it's possible I didn't.
It just didn't leave much of an impression that first time on you. Yeah.
Yeah, I watched it the first time, like, I don't know, a year ago, not that long ago. And I remember watching it and, like, maybe I was just like in a pissy mood that day or something. You know what I mean? It was one of those things where, like, I watched it. I love Jim Jarmusch. It was like, I was like, Saturday night, everybody's asleep in the house.
Yeah.
What's on Amazon? Oh, right. They've got Gimme Danger. I've been meaning to see that.
Yeah.
I'm supposed to know stuff about rock dogs.
And
I
do think I think I watched it while scouting for the show. Like, ooh, this could be a thing.
Yeah. We, Andy and I are not pure. We're no longer, we're no longer naive consumers of this content. We have to keep an eye on rock docs to generate content for the show.
Those people are
we
out
can't
there.
enjoy it the way a regular fan can.
Yeah. The people are out in the streets. They want to know.
People don't know what you guys go through. I mean, they have no idea.
It's a lot.
If they knew, they would.
Yeah. I remember, like, I enjoyed it, but it didn't grab me that much. And then on this rewatch, I was like, there is so much texture in this movie that I didn't notice the first time. And I don't know, maybe I was just more open to it or whatever. But I think it does. It rewards more than one watch. And yeah, I think I would, if I was setting it up for somebody, I would just be like, look, maybe you don't know about the Stooges or care that much about the history of, like, early punk rock or whatever, but Iggy Pop is so fascinating and such an interesting storyteller.
That's true.
That you're going to get, he is the main narrator of this film. And if you can open your mind and your soul to, like, getting on his vibration, then you're going to just be like, this is a delightful story being told by one of the most fascinating people that has ever walked the planet. So
I buy that.
From that perspective, I'm recommending. And for somebody who's not on that level, hey, watch whatever, man. Watch yesterday. It's cool. I don't judge.
Yep.
That's not what we're about here, Rock Dogs.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think Iggy pushes it over the top. That I would recommend it to somebody who, maybe not a Stooges fan, but a classic rock era fan. Sure. Yeah, definitely.
Get into it. All right, Dan, what do you want to plug, share, anything? I don't know.
It's Pretty Good Vibrations.
Pretty Good Vibrations.
A name I woke up with one morning. It's the first 3 words into my head. And I said, I think that's it. I was raised on the Beach Boys.
Did you call Brian Wilson just to check if that was cool?
I called Mike Love too. I just wanted to make sure they both agreed.
Moe Howard.
I called him up. No, but it's basically, I call it pop and rock music. There's an emphasis on kind of punk, emo, indie, that kind of thing. But I do go back into, like, the 60s here and there. Like, there are upcoming episodes on 80s punk, on post Beatles solo albums, a super deep dive into the Beach Boys, all 30 albums. And that one's going to be a very long 2 or 3 parter. But then there's shorter ones, like on new metal or power pop or Blink-182, stuff like that. It's fun.
So how far off do you think you are from doing a full episode on the early 90s neo hippie jam band movement vis-a-vis the Horde tour?
that day will never
some
come.
spin doctors, some
No.
rusted root, some
Nope.
not
Do you wanna
happening.
just-
That's
Do you want to
never
just
happening.
ask the questions you usually ask, Andy, while we're here?
Dan, do you like Goose?
What's Goose?
Okay.
Man.
Next question.
I
Two in a
saw
row.
I
Two in a row.
saw actually someone on Instagram posted a thing about how their dad texts them like a junior higher, and it was talking about the band Goose.
Oh,
But
yeah?
that was
Okay.
like a couple hours ago, so I haven't listened. No.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Dial it up. Let me know. Let me know what you
Goose?
think.
What kind of
Yeah.
do you want to tell me anything about it beforehand?
Do I want to tell you anything about it beforehand? Yeah.
Goose
I mean, I
is
think
a great band name, by the way.
Yeah.
It is.
I
It's
support that.
it's good. I think they're a fantastic band. I'm very into them.
Okay.
They're they're a jam band certainly, but I would
Okay.
say they can sing, which is their distinguishing characteristic in the genre.
Jam
Some
bands
of
are
their
like
songs are good. It's kind of
pretty
weird.
far away for me. Like jam bands
Yeah.
are.
I get
It
it.
takes, but
Yeah.
let's see what happens.
Yeah.
Let's see what happens.
They have a lot of indie influence. They like Justin Vernon a lot. They've covered Bon Iver.
Goose.
They
Okay.
sort of think
They do some
Thank you.
cool covers.
they do a lot of cool
Cool.
covers. Yeah, as
Mhm.
as any jam band does. But they have great vocals. They harmonize well, which is not
Mhm.
something I think you would expect from many jam bands.
And the lyrics
Yeah.
have like a kind of a weird spiritual vibe going on because Rick's got his own. I don't remember what his religious bent is, but it's
It's like
a
kind
little-
of Buddhist. It's got
it's
like a
a little
Buddhist-
off the beaten path.
Yeah.
There's an interesting thing
Goose.
going on with the lyrics. They're a good band. I like Goose.
Well,
Like, not-
the two things I wanted to plug were my Pretty Good Vibrations podcast and Goose. So thank you, Andrew,
Yeah.
for
okay,
All
no
right,
problem.
great.
getting us there.
All right.
Good.
All right. Thanks.
Pretty
Dan.
good
Thanks-
vibrations.
Thank you guys so much for having me. This was really, really fun, and it was a great excuse to rewatch this movie. And I like your show. Thanks for making it.
Awesome.
Cheers, man.
All right. Well, thanks for listening to Rock Docs. If you liked what you heard, please go ahead and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you found us, etc. Rock Docs is a Treble media podcast. Treble is a fully independent media outlet devoted to music. You can find out more at treblezine.com. And if you'd like to support the community of writers and creators behind Treble, please head to patreon.com/treblezine. Thanks. And we will talk to you next time on Rock Docs.
Iggy and the Stooges reinvented music as we know it.
We weren't like the other bands.
A feeling come over you with this great sound that we're making, and sometimes I would just hammer on my guitar.
I just started jumping up and down like baboons do before they're going to fight. As soon as I started doing that, we were real communists. We lived in a communal house. We shared all money. And when we began to write songs, we shared authorship. When I was a little boy, the Ford Motor Company, they had a machine that engineered a drop, a mega clang. I thought we should get some of that in our songs.
We were just left without any adult supervision. I mean, we just did our thing.
We bumbled around America, playing raggedly. Some gigs I could get it together to sing, some I couldn't. Upsetting people wherever we went.
Thank you very much to the person who threw this glass bottle at my head. Nearly killed me, but you missed again. So keep trying next week.
Do you feel you've influenced anybody?
I think I helped wipe out the 60s. I don't want to belong to the glam people, alternative people, to any of it. I don't want to be a punk. I just want to be.